First on the Kelly File tonight, the House of Representatives just passed a bill aimed at keeping sex offenders, convicted sex offenders, and violent felons from working in our children's schools. But both Democrats and Republicans supported this thing. Nonetheless, as it heads to the Senate, the teachers' unions are now objecting. Kyle Olson is with the Education Action Group Foundation, and he is in disbelief over this. I mean, Kyle, both the one thing that Democrats and Republicans agree on, let's keep the convicted rapists and sex offenders away from our most vulnerable, our children in their schools. And the teachers union says we disagree. Why?
It seems like a no-brainer, but I think ultimately unions are out to protect the adults. They're out for their dues payers, for their members. They're not out for the interests of the children. And so that's why we see their opposition to bills like this. But look, we should have zero tolerance for issues like this. We should have a higher ethical standard for teachers and school employees. I mean, just think about zero tolerance. We have zero tolerance policies for weapons. A kid who bites a Pop-Tart into a gun or has a Hello Kitty bubble maker will be suspended or expelled if they have those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But yet we can't have a zero tolerance policy for people convicted, as you said, convicted, not rumors,
right,
not allegations.
Right, not a question in a
Convicted
court of law.
rape and those sorts of issues.
But let me tell you why some are objecting, including, it's not just unions. Congressman Keith Ellison of Minnesota, Democrat of Minnesota, said the language will ignore the ability of people to overcome their criminal backgrounds by imposing lifetime bans. I mean, I'm thinking, how do you overcome your history of murder?
Well, we should have one strike and you're out when it comes to schools. And we're not saying, these people shouldn't be able to have a job or anything like that, but they shouldn't be in a school. They shouldn't have direct access to children. I mean, again, I think that's a no-brainer.
Who wants a
but
convicted
unfortunately,
sex offender
a bill actually has to
working
be
next to their
produced and
children?
passed like that.
And the bill covers everybody. I mean, from janitors to administrators, principals, teachers, you name it. If you're going to be working in the school near children, you can't do it. There's just certain things. There's certain rights you give up if you rape somebody and get convicted, murder somebody, commit a sex offense and get convicted. And yet the teachers union comes out and says it doesn't include any individualized assessment that would allow people to provide information on why they no longer pose a risk. And they also object, this is from the American Federation of Teachers, because background checks would be costly to the prospective employees who sometimes have to bear the cost of their own background checks. Are they kidding? Does anybody rise up in response to this from the House or the Senate?
Well, what value do we put on the safety of our children? I mean, the other thing that they bring up is there would be a racial disparity if we do these background checks. And, the safety of our children should be colorblind. It shouldn't matter what the race of anybody is. What we should be doing is protecting the safety of our children. That should be paramount. And it shouldn't matter what the unions say. We should tell them to buzz off and not be putting their members first. We need to be putting the interest of the children first. Fortunately, the House did that, and we'll have to see if the Senate does that.
What is the real end game by the unions? Because, you can't imagine that the unions want convicted rapists to be working next to their children in these schools. So what is the motivation?
I think their ultimate motivation is protecting the so-called rights of their members. That's their motivation. They don't really care about the optics, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be putting themselves in this sort of position. But that's what they focus on, is their members, not the students,
but
their members.
Getting paid the dues, you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. They are the ones that are paying the dues. The children aren't paying the dues. The adults are the ones paying the dues. And what's unfortunate about this is that there are millions of teachers in America who would never even think about laying a hand on a child or doing something inappropriate.
Most.
And yet they have to be paying dues to this union who is putting them in this position.
You hadn't even covered that. I mean, how'd you like to be a teacher knowing that the union had advocated, we really want the convicted rapists, convicted murderers, convicted spouse beaters, convicted sex offenders to be working right next to you. Not to mention convicted kidnappers. I mean, can't even agree that those people shouldn't be near the children. It's unbelievable. Thank you very much for calling our attention to it, Kyle.
Thank you.
Taking your thoughts on that on Twitter. Follow me at Megyn Kelly.